On the most important day of her life, he rejected her in front of hundreds of people. The humiliation burned so much that she never imagined it would save her life. The morning Helena woke up, she had no idea that by sunset, her entire world would crumble into ash and humiliation. The ceremonial bells echoed across the Moonstone Valley, their ancient bronze voices calling every soul to witness what should have been the most glorious moment of her 22 years. Instead, it would become the day she learned that sometimes the cruelest gift fate can offer is exactly what you think you want. Helena pressed her palm against the cool stone wall of her chamber, feeling the familiar pulse of energy that ran through the sacred buildings of her clan. The Silverwood Pack had called this valley home for 7 generations, their lives intertwined with the mystical currents that flowed beneath the earth like veins of liquid starlight. Today, during the choosing ceremony held under the full moon's blessing, Alpha Marcus would finally select his mate from among the eligible females. Helena had spent 3 years preparing for this moment, 3 years believing with every fiber of her being that she was destined to stand beside him as Luna of their pack. The irony would later taste bitter on her tongue. She had been right about her destiny, just wrong about the details. Her reflection in the mirror showed a young woman with luminous amber eyes and hair the color of autumn leaves, arranged in intricate braids woven with silver threads according to tradition. The ceremonial dress, passed down through her maternal line, hugged her curves in ivory silk embroidered with ancient protection symbols. She looked every inch the Luna she believed she was meant to be. Her grandmother's moonstone pendant rested against her throat, warm with inherited magic. "You're glowing, child," her mother whispered from the doorway, but Helena caught the tremor in her voice, the shadow of worry that had haunted their family for weeks. There had been whispers, conversations that stopped when Helena entered rooms, glances exchanged between the pack elders that spoke of secrets she wasn't privy to. Her intuition, always sharp as a blade, had picked up on every subtle shift in the pack's energy, but she had dismissed it as pre-ceremony nerves. She should have listened to that inner voice. The ceremonial grounds stretched beneath towering pine trees, their branches heavy with silver moss that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Hundreds of pack members formed concentric circles around the sacred altar, their faces turned upward in anticipation. The air thrummed with ancient magic, thick enough to taste on her tongue like copper and honey. Helena took her place among the 7 other eligible females, each one beautiful, each one worthy, but none carrying the absolute certainty that Helena felt coursing through her veins. Alpha Marcus emerged from the Elder's Grove wearing the ceremonial robes of leadership, his dark hair gleaming and his emerald eyes scanning the assembled females with an expression Helena couldn't quite read. At 28, he commanded respect through both his powerful werewolf bloodline and his natural authority. Helena had known him since childhood, had felt the pull of destiny every time their gazes met across crowded gatherings. Surely he felt it too. The ritual began with the ancient words, spoken in the old tongue, that made Helena's bones vibrate with recognition. Elderthorn raised his gnarled staff toward the moon, calling upon the blessing of their ancestors. One by one, Marcus would approach each eligible female, place his hand upon her heart, and feel for the mystical connection that would identify his true mate. It was said that when the bond sparked, both souls would know it instantly, a recognition that transcended mere attraction and spoke to the deepest magic of their kind. Helena watched as Marcus moved methodically through the first 6 women. Each time he placed his palm against their hearts, closed his eyes in concentration, then stepped back with a polite but definitive shake of his head. The rejection stung each woman, but they bore it with dignity, understanding that the magic either sparked or it didn't. There was no shame in not being chosen when destiny itself made the decision. When Marcus finally stood before Helena, her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. This was it. This was the moment she had dreamed of, prepared for, lived for. His hand, warm and slightly calloused from training, pressed against her chest, just above her heart. She felt his touch like electricity, shooting through every nerve ending, her wolf spirit rising to meet his, in what should have been perfect harmony. For a heartbeat that lasted eternity, she saw something flicker in his eyes. Recognition, longing, perhaps even love. Her wolf sang with joy, ready to claim its mate, ready to bind their souls together in the sacred bond that would last beyond death itself. Helena smiled, her whole face illuminating with happiness so pure it made several pack members gasp in recognition. Then Marcus stepped back. "I feel no bond," he announced, his voice carrying clearly across the silent assembly. "Helena Ravensong is not my destined mate." The words hit her like a physical blow, stealing the breath from her lungs and sending her reeling backward as if he had struck her. The ceremonial ground spun around her as hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed upon her with a mixture of pity, shock, and something that looked almost like relief. The magical energy that had been building around them dissipated like smoke in the wind, leaving behind only the cold reality of rejection. But Helena's intuition, that sharp inner voice that had never steered her wrong, screamed that something was deeply amiss. The way Marcus's jaw had tensed, the fleeting emotion she had glimpsed in his eyes before, it was shuttered away. The subtle tremor in his voice when he spoke the ritual words of rejection, none of it felt genuine. Her gift for reading people, honed through years of mediating disputes and counseling pack members, told her this was a performance, not truth. "I don't understand," she whispered, though her words were lost in the murmur of the crowd. Around her, the other rejected females began to drift away, some weeping softly, others maintaining stoic dignity. But Helena remained frozen in place, staring at Marcus with growing confusion and dawning horror. Elder Thorn's voice boomed across the grounds. "As no mate has been chosen this night, the ceremony is concluded. The Alpha will begin a period of seeking, during which time, no..." Helena's voice cut through the formal pronouncement like a sword through silk. She stepped forward, her amber eyes blazing with an inner fire that made several pack members shift nervously. "Something is wrong here. I felt the bond. I know you felt it too, Marcus." "Why are you lying?" The gasps that rippled through the crowd were audible, shocked breaths drawn by hundreds of witnesses to what was essentially a public challenge to their Alpha's authority. No one questioned the choosing. The magic was absolute. The moon goddess's will undeniable. For Helena to suggest otherwise bordered on blasphemy. Marcus's face hardened into a mask of cold authority. "You felt nothing because there was nothing to feel, Helena. Your desperation has clouded your judgment. Accept the moon goddess's decision with grace." Each word was carefully chosen to wound, to humiliate, to crush any remaining dignity she might claim. Helena felt them like poison arrows finding their mark, each one designed to make her appear foolish, delusional, perhaps even unstable. The pack members who had known her since childhood, who had seen her kindness and wisdom in action countless times, began to look at her with doubt and embarrassment. "Please," she said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to remain strong. "Marcus, just tell me the truth. Whatever political reason, whatever pressure you're under, we can face it together. Don't do this. Don't destroy what we have because of fear or duty or whatever is making you pretend." "Enough." His voice cracked like a whip across the sacred ground. "Your behavior is becoming unseemly, Helena. Return to your family before you embarrass yourself further." The dismissal was brutal in its finality, delivered with the full authority of an alpha addressing an insubordinate pack member. Helena felt her cheeks burn with humiliation as tears she refused to shed blurred her vision. Around her, the crowd began to disperse, conversations starting in hushed tones that would no doubt dissect every moment of her public humiliation for weeks to come. Her mother appeared at her side, gentle hands guiding her away from the ceremonial ground before she could say anything else to damage her reputation further. But as they walked, Helena caught sight of something that made her blood run cold. Elder Thorn was speaking quietly with Marcus, and in his weathered hand was a scroll sealed with black wax, the kind used only for the most binding magical contracts. Her intuition, that gift that had always guided her true, suddenly blazed with terrible understanding. This wasn't about love or destiny or the moon goddess's will. This was about politics, about agreements made in shadow, about her life being traded like a commodity in some larger game she didn't even know was being played. The realization should have broken her. Instead, it kindled something fiercer than heartbreak in her chest, a flame of determination that would soon grow into an inferno. If Marcus wanted to play games with her fate, he was about to learn that Helena Ravensong was not a pawn to be moved at will. But first, she had to survive the shame of this night and the exile that she somehow knew was coming. Because in the world of supernatural politics, public rejection was never the end of the story. It was only the beginning. As they reached her family's dwelling, Helena turned back one last time to look at the ceremonial ground where her dreams had died. Marcus stood alone near the altar, his shoulders tense with some burden she couldn't name. For just a moment, his careful mask slipped, and she saw the same anguish in his face that was tearing her apart from the inside. That glimpse of shared pain told her everything she needed to know. This rejection wasn't real. It was required. And if it was required, that meant someone powerful enough to force an alpha's hand wanted her gone from the Silverwood pack. The question was why. And Helena intended to find out, even if the search destroyed everything she thought she knew about herself and the world she had called home. 3 days later, when the black carriages arrived at dawn to escort her into exile, she was ready for them. Ready to leave behind everything familiar and step into whatever destiny awaited her beyond the borders of her old life. Because sometimes the greatest gift fate offers isn't what you think you want. Sometimes it's the courage to discover who you really are when everything you thought you knew is stripped away. The wheels of her carriage had barely begun to turn when Helena felt it. A pull toward the north, toward territories she had been taught to fear since childhood, toward lands ruled by Alpha Darius Blackthorn, the enemy of her people, the shadow that had haunted every story of her youth. She should have been terrified. Instead, as the familiar hills of her homeland disappeared behind her, Helena felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 days of shame and sorrow. She felt hope. The Shadowmere territory stretched before Helena like a landscape from her darkest nightmares, yet somehow more beautiful than any dream she had ever dared to imagine. Ancient oak trees towered overhead, their branches intertwined so thickly that only scattered beams of sunlight managed to pierce through to the forest floor below. The air itself seemed alive with magic, thicker and wilder than anything she had known in the cultivated valleys of her homeland. This was power in its rawest form, untamed and dangerous, calling to something deep within her wolf spirit that she had never known existed. The black carriages had traveled for 2 days through increasingly hostile terrain before crossing into Blackthorn lands. Helena had spent those hours in silence, her mind racing with questions that had no answers and fears that grew stronger with each mile. What did Alpha Darius Blackthorn want with her? Why had Marcus been forced to reject her so publicly? And why did every instinct she possessed whisper that her exile was not punishment, but preparation for something far more significant? When the carriages finally stopped, Helena found herself standing before the most magnificent and terrifying structure she had ever seen. Raven's Hollow Keep rose from the mountainside like something carved from the living rock itself, its black stone walls seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. Towers spiraled impossibly high, disappearing into mist that clung to the peaks like ghostly fingers. Gothic arches and flying buttresses created a silhouette against the storm-darkened sky that spoke of ancient power and secrets buried so deep they might never see daylight again. "Welcome to your new home, Helena Ravensong." The voice was deep, rich as aged whiskey, with an undertone of danger that made her wolf spirit prick its ears in alert attention. She turned to find herself face to face with Alpha Darius Blackthorn himself, and the sight of him stole what little composure she had managed to maintain. He was nothing like the monster her people had painted him to be. Tall and powerfully built, with jet-black hair that caught blue highlights in the dim forest light, he possessed a dark beauty that was both mesmerizing and unsettling. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, silver gray, and filled with an intelligence that seemed to see straight through to her soul. But it was the aura of controlled power that surrounded him that made Helena's breath catch in her throat. This was an alpha in the truest sense, a predator who ruled not through fear alone, but through the sheer force of his presence. "I'm not welcome anywhere, apparently," Helena replied, lifting her chin in defiance despite the tremor in her voice. "So forgive me if I don't feel particularly grateful for your hospitality." Something flickered in those storm-grey eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or approval. "Fire," he murmured as if to himself. "Good. You'll need that here." He gestured toward the keep with one elegant hand. "Come. We have much to discuss, and very little time to waste on the luxury of gradual introductions." Helena had no choice but to follow, though every step toward the imposing structure felt like walking deeper into a trap she couldn't see the edges of. The massive doors were carved with symbols she didn't recognize, swirling patterns that seemed to move in her peripheral vision. When Darius placed his palm against the central sigil, the doors swung open, with a sound like distant thunder, revealing an interior that defied everything she thought she knew about the savage Blackthorn pack. The Great Hall was a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow and stained glass windows that cast jeweled light across polished marble floors. Tapestries depicting scenes of hunts and battles decorated the walls, but they were woven with such artistry that they belonged in a museum, not a warrior's stronghold. This wasn't the crude dwelling of barbarians. It was the palace of a civilization far older and more sophisticated than her own. "Surprised?" Darius asked, noting her wide-eyed expression. "Your people tell many stories about us, but very few of them are true. We find it useful to let our enemies underestimate us." "Are we enemies?" Helena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "That remains to be seen." He led her through corridors lined with portraits of previous alphas, their painted eyes seeming to follow her progress. "Tell me, Helena Ravensong, what do you know about the Convergence Prophecy?" The question hit her like a physical blow. The Convergence Prophecy was forbidden knowledge, something whispered about in the darkest corners of pact law but never discussed openly. Legend spoke of a time when the scattered supernatural territories would unite under joint leadership, ushering in an age of unprecedented power and prosperity, but the cost of such unity was said to be terrible, requiring sacrifices that few would willingly make. "I know it's a fairy tale," she lied, unwilling to admit that she had spent countless hours in her clan's archives, piecing together fragments of the ancient prophecy like a puzzle with half its pieces missing. Darius stopped walking and turned to face her fully. When their eyes met, Helena felt something electric pass between them, a recognition that went deeper than mere attraction. Her wolf spirit stirred restlessly, drawn to his power in a way that both thrilled and terrified her. "The prophecy speaks of two bloodlines," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. "One born of moonlight and healing, the other forged in shadow and storm. When they unite, the barriers between territories will crumble, and our people will know peace for the first time in centuries." Helena's heart began to race as the implications of his words sank in. "You think I'm part of this prophecy?" "I don't think, Helena. I know." He reached into his coat and withdrew a scroll made of parchment so old it seemed to whisper with age. Your bloodline has been traced back 12 generations to Lyrelai the Moonweaver, one of the original founders of supernatural law. My line descends from her partner and rival, Blackthorn the Stormcaller. The prophecy requires their descendants to unite through a bond deeper than mere political alliance. The scroll unfurled in his hands, revealing text written in silver ink that glowed faintly in the dim light. Helena could only read portions of it. Her knowledge of the ancient script limited, but what she could decipher made her knees weak with shock. A mating bond, she breathed, understanding flooding through her like cold water. You want me to be your mate? Want has nothing to do with it, Darius replied, though something in his tone suggested that wasn't entirely true. This is about survival, Helena. The human world grows stronger every day, their technology advancing, while our magic stagnates behind territorial divisions. If we don't unite soon, we'll be swept away by forces we're too fractured to fight. Helena sank into one of the ornate chairs that lined the corridor, her mind reeling with the magnitude of what he was suggesting. That's why Marcus rejected me. You made some kind of deal with my clan. Your former alpha was surprisingly reasonable once he understood what was at stake. The rejection had to appear genuine, had to be public and humiliating enough that no one would question your exile. If your people suspected you were leaving willingly to mate with their enemy, civil war would have been inevitable. The casual way he discussed the destruction of her life, the orchestration of her humiliation, ignited a fury in Helena that burned hotter than anything she had ever experienced. She shot to her feet, her amber eyes blazing with inner fire. You destroyed everything I held dear for politics. You let me believe I was worthless, unwanted, broken. Also, you could play out some ancient fantasy about uniting territories through forced marriage? Not forced, Darius said quietly, and something in his voice made her pause in her tirade. The prophecy is clear, Helena. The bond must be freely chosen by both parties, or it won't hold. I can't make you accept this destiny any more than you can make me release you from it. We're bound by something larger than either of us. Then let me choose to leave, she challenged, crossing her arms over her chest. If it truly must be willing, let me walk out of here right now and return to... She stopped, realizing with dawning horror that she had nowhere to return to. Her exile had been absolute, her former life burned to ash by a rejection that had been scripted like a play. You're beginning to understand, Darius observed. There is no going back, Helena. There is only forward, into whatever future we create together or separately. But before you make that choice, let me show you something. He led her deeper into the keep, through passages that seemed to pulse with their own heartbeat. The walls were lined with crystals that glowed softly in response to their presence, casting dancing shadows that made the ancient stone seem alive. They descended a spiral staircase that felt like it was taking them into the very heart of the mountain itself. At the bottom lay a circular chamber unlike anything Helena had ever seen. The walls were covered in murals that told the story of their people's origins, painted in colors so vivid they seemed to glow with their own inner light. At the center of the room stood a pool of water so perfectly still it looked like liquid mirror, reflecting images that seemed to come from somewhere other than the chamber above. The scrying pool, Darius explained, his voice hushed with reverence. It shows truth, past and future, to those with the blood to see. Look, Helena, see what your people have hidden from you. Against her better judgment, she approached the pool and gazed into its depths. The surface shimmered, and suddenly she was seeing visions that made her gasp with recognition and horror. Her parents, meeting in secret with pack elders, discussing her unusual abilities with worry rather than pride. Marcus, pacing his chambers in anguish as he read documents bearing official seals. Her grandmother, the woman she had loved most in the world, weeping as she spoke words Helena couldn't quite hear, but somehow understood. They had all known. Every person she had trusted, every authority figure she had respected, every family member she had loved, they had all known that her life was not her own, that she was destined for something larger and more dangerous than she could comprehend. The betrayal cut deeper than Marcus's rejection ever could. "Why didn't they tell me?" she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Because they were afraid," Darius said gently, moving to stand beside her. The prophecy speaks of great power, but also of great sacrifice. They hoped that if you never knew your true heritage, you might live a normal life, free from the burden of destiny. But you took that choice away from them, from me. The choice was never theirs to make. His voice was harder now, carrying the full authority of an alpha who had made impossible decisions for the greater good. Every day we delay, more of our people die in territorial conflicts. Every month that passes, the human world encroaches further into our sacred lands. I won't let centuries of tradition and power die because a few parents couldn't bear to let their daughter fulfill her purpose. Helena straightened, wiping away her tears and meeting his gaze directly. "And what if I'm not strong enough for this purpose? What if your prophecy is wrong, and I'm just an ordinary wolf who got caught up in something beyond her understanding?" For the first time since she had met him, Darius smiled. A real smile that transformed his austere features and made him look younger, more human. "Helena, you stood up to an alpha in front of your entire pack. You've been in my territory for less than an hour, and you're already challenging me at every turn. Trust me, strength is not something you lack." Before she could respond, a commotion echoed through the corridors above them. Shouts, running footsteps, and the sound of something heavy being dragged across stone floors. Darius's expression immediately shifted back to cold authority, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon at his side. "It seems we have visitors," he said grimly. "Stay close to me, Helena. It appears someone doesn't want this union to take place." As they climbed back toward the main level of the keep, Helena couldn't shake the feeling that her real test was just beginning. The prophecy, the political maneuvering, the painful revelations about her family's deception, all of it paled in comparison to whatever was waiting for them above. But as they reached the great hall and she saw armed figures in the colors of her former pack surrounding a bound and bloodied messenger, Helena realized that her past wasn't done with her yet, and the choice between her old life and her prophesied destiny was about to become far more complicated than either she or Darius had anticipated. The messenger raised his head, and Helena's blood turned to ice in her veins. It was Thomas, Marcus's younger brother, and the desperate hope in his eyes when he saw her made her heart clench with renewed pain. "Helena," he gasped through swollen lips. "Thank the goddess you're alive. Marcus sent me to tell you. The contract was a lie. He never agreed to your exile. You were taken against his will, and he's coming to get you back." The silence that followed Thomas's desperate words stretched like a blade between Helena's ribs. She stared at the bloodied messenger, her mind struggling to process what he had just revealed. Marcus was coming for her. The rejection had been orchestrated, yes, but not by him. The contract Darius claimed existed was a lie. Everything she thought she understood about her exile crumbled like sand between her fingers. "That's impossible," Darius said, his voice cutting through the charged air like steel. "I have the signed agreement. Your alpha agreed to the terms." Thomas struggled against his bonds, his eyes never leaving Helena's face. "The signature was forged. Elder Thorn acted without the Alpha's knowledge, convinced he was saving the pack from a war that would destroy us all. Marcus only discovered the deception 2 days ago when he found the real contract hidden in Thorn's chambers." Helena felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Elder Thorn, the man who had watched her grow up, who had blessed her on her naming day, who had taught her the ancient stories by firelight. He had orchestrated her destruction to prevent a conflict that might never have come to pass. "You're lying," Darius growled, but Helena caught the flash of uncertainty in his storm-grey eyes. Thorn wouldn't dare act against his alpha's direct orders. Wouldn't he? Helena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos raging in her heart. You said yourself that people will do terrible things to avoid war. Maybe Thorn decided that sacrificing one woman was worth preventing the deaths of hundreds. Before anyone could respond, the great doors of the hall burst open with a sound like thunder. Marcus strode in, flanked by a dozen of his finest warriors, their weapons drawn and their eyes blazing with barely contained fury. But it was Marcus himself who commanded attention, his presence filling the vast space with an authority that rivaled even Darius's dark power. "Release her," he commanded, his voice carrying the full weight of an alpha's dominance. "Helena belongs to the Silverwood Pack, and I'm taking her home." The tension in the hall became suffocating as two alphas faced each other across 20 feet of polished marble. Helena found herself caught between them, torn between the life she had lost and the destiny she had never asked for. Both men were magnificent in their fury, both convinced they were fighting for her best interests, and both completely wrong about what she actually wanted. "She belongs to no one but herself," Darius replied, his own power rising to meet Marcus's challenge. "And the prophecy—" "Damn the prophecy!" Marcus snarled, taking a step forward. "I won't let ancient words dictate the fate of the woman I love." The declaration hit Helena like a physical blow. Love. After everything that had happened, after the public humiliation and the days of believing herself worthless, Marcus claimed to love her. But love that came with conditions, love that bent to political pressure, love that could be overruled by fear. Was that really love at all? "If you loved me," she said quietly, her words somehow carrying clearly through the tense silence, "you would have fought for me 3 days ago instead of letting me believe I was rejected and unwanted." Marcus's face crumpled with anguish. "Helena, I thought I was protecting you. Thorn convinced me that Blackthorn would start a war if I refused his demands. I thought if I went along with the rejection publicly, I could find another way to—" "To what?" she interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. "To negotiate for me, like I was a piece of property, to decide my fate without consulting me, to let me suffer because it was politically convenient." "That's not—" Marcus began, but Helena held up her hand, silencing him. "And you," she turned to face Darius, her amber eyes blazing with newfound determination. "You speak of prophecy and destiny as if I have no choice in the matter. You orchestrated my humiliation, my exile, my complete upheaval of life, all for some ancient words written by people who died centuries ago." Darius's jaw tightened. "The prophecy is not merely words, Helena. It's the key to our survival as a people." "Then maybe our people deserve to fall," she shot back, shocking everyone in the hall with her vehemence. "Maybe any society that treats its members as chess pieces in a game they didn't consent to play isn't worth preserving." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything both alphas represented. Helena felt a strange sense of liberation wash over her as she spoke her truth, finally understanding that her real enemy wasn't rejection or exile or even ancient prophecies. It was the system that treated her as anything less than a person capable of making her own choices. "You want to know what I choose," she continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "I choose neither of you. I choose to forge my own path, free from the expectations and manipulations of men who think they know what's best for me." But even as she spoke the words, Helena felt something stirring deep within her wolf spirit, a power she had never experienced before, wild and ancient and undeniably her own. The moonstone pendant at her throat began to glow with inner light, and the air around her shimmered with energy that made both alphas step back in alarm. "Helena," Darius said urgently, "you need to calm down. Your power is awakening, and without proper control—" "My power?" she laughed, the sound carrying notes of hysteria and discovery in equal measure. "You mean the power you've all been so careful to manipulate and control?" The power that makes me valuable enough to fight over, but not valuable enough to treat as an equal. The glow around her intensified, and suddenly the scrying pool's visions were no longer confined to its chamber. Images flickered through the air above their heads, the true history of her bloodline, stretching back not 12 generations but 20, to the very founding of supernatural civilization. She saw Lirelai the Moonweaver, not as Darius had described her, but as she really was, a woman who had refused to be bound by the expectations of her time, who had forged her own path and changed the world in the process. The prophecy, Helena gasped as understanding flooded through her like lightning. It's not about uniting bloodlines through marriage. It's about a single individual who carries both lineages within herself. The revelation struck the hall like a thunderbolt. Helena felt the truth of it resonating in her bones as memories that weren't her own flashed through her consciousness. Lirelai and Blackthorn hadn't been partners or rivals. They had been lovers whose forbidden union had produced a child hidden away to protect both bloodlines from destruction. That child's descendants had been scattered across the territories, their true heritage concealed until now. Impossible, Darius breathed, but his eyes showed he was beginning to understand. The bloodlines were kept separate. The records were falsified. Helena finished, her voice carrying new authority as power continued to build around her. Your prophecy was created to hide the truth, not reveal it. I don't need to unite with either of you because I already carry both legacies within myself. Marcus stepped forward, his expression a mixture of awe and concern. Helena, if this is true, then you're more powerful than any alpha alive. But power like that, without proper training, will destroy everything in its path, completed a new voice from the shadows. Elder Thorn emerged from behind one of the great pillars, his weathered face grim with resignation. Which is why I tried to prevent this awakening, why I forged the contracts and orchestrated the rejection. Not to unite the bloodlines, but to keep them safely separate. Helena turned to face the man who had shaped so much of her life from the shadows, feeling her power pulse with barely contained fury. You knew what I was. I've known since the day you were born, Thorn admitted. Your grandmother confessed the truth on her deathbed, made me swear to protect you from your own heritage. She had seen what happened to others who carried mixed bloodlines, the madness, the destruction, the inability to control forces too great for any one person to wield. So you decided to control me instead, Helena said, her voice deadly quiet. To manipulate my entire life, destroy my happiness, and exile me from everything I loved, all to keep me from discovering who I really am. To keep everyone safe, Thorn insisted. Your power, unleashed without proper understanding, could tear apart the barriers between our world and the human realm. Millions would die. Helena felt the truth of his words, even as she rejected his methods. The power coursing through her was vast and wild, barely contained by her mortal form. She could feel it pressing against her control, seeking outlets that would reshape reality itself. The temptation to let it loose, to punish everyone who had hurt her, was almost overwhelming, but she was not her ancestors. She was Helena Ravensong, and she would forge her own path. You're right about one thing, she said, forcing her power back under control with effort that left her trembling. This much power in one person is dangerous, but the solution isn't to hide from it or pretend it doesn't exist. The solution is to learn to use it responsibly. She turned to address both alphas, her voice carrying new authority that made them straighten despite themselves. I propose a different kind of unity, not through marriage or political alliance, but through shared knowledge and mutual respect. I'll work with both your packs to develop control over this power, but as an equal partner, not as a prize to be won or a threat to be contained. And if we refuse? Darius asked, though his tone suggested he was already considering her proposal. Helena smiled, and for the first time in days, it was a real smile, full of confidence and determination. then you'll miss the opportunity to be part of something truly revolutionary. Because with or without your help, I'm going to change the world. Marcus stepped forward, his expression softening as he looked at her. Helena, I want you to know that my feelings for you were never about prophecy or politics. If you'll have me, I want to earn back your trust and prove that my love is real. Before she could respond, Darius moved closer as well. And I want you to know that my interest in you has grown beyond mere duty. You're remarkable, Helena, and I would be honored to stand beside you as an ally, regardless of what any prophecy demands. Helena looked between the two powerful men who had shaped her destiny in such different ways. She could feel the genuine emotion behind their words, the real attraction and respect that had grown alongside their political maneuvering. But she also knew that her path forward couldn't be defined by either of them. "Thank you," she said softly. "Both of you. But I need time to discover who I am when I'm not trying to meet anyone else's expectations. Give me that time and we'll see what the future holds." As if summoned by her words, a warm wind began to blow through the great hall, carrying the scent of spring flowers and new beginnings. The ancient stones of the keep hummed with approval, and somewhere in the distance, Helena could hear the sound of barriers crumbling. Not just between territories, but between past and future, between who she had been and who she was becoming. She had been rejected, exiled, manipulated, and betrayed, but she had also discovered strength she never knew she possessed, power beyond imagination, and the courage to forge her own destiny. The girl who had woken up 3 days ago believing her worth was determined by an alpha's choice, was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who would reshape the supernatural world not through marriage or prophecy, but through the sheer force of her will and the depth of her compassion. The rejection that had seemed like the end of her story had actually been its true beginning. And as Helena Ravensong walked out of Raven's Hollow Keep into the dawn of a new day, she carried with her the power to heal centuries of division and the wisdom to use it well. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to write. Behind her, 2 alphas watched her go with expressions of awe, desire, and newfound respect. They would wait for her, as would their packs and the wider supernatural community that would soon learn about the woman who had the power to unite them all. But Helena was no longer waiting for anyone else's approval. She was finally, truly free.